Something I haven't said in a while. Hey, I'm Kathryn. Welcome to my podcast. Today is Wednesday, February 21st, 2018. I am coming to you from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, where I live with my husband, Andrew, and our dog, Iggy. You can find me on Ravelry as Hey, I'm Kathryn Knits, and you can find me on Instagram at Hey, I'm Kathryn_the podcast. So if this is your first time joining me, thank you very much for taking some time out of your day to check out my corner of YouTube. This is my podcast where I talk mostly about knitting right now, but where I'm hoping to branch out into all kinds of other makery endeavors. If you are a returning viewer, thank you very much for being so patient in waiting for me to come back and film again. I think I filmed episode 4 in August. I filmed a little half episode catch-up thingy in October after Gord Downey died, and it has been radio silence since then. So it's been almost 7 months since I did an actual real podcast episode. Nothing major catastrophic happened, which I'm very, very thankful for. I just ended up not having a lot of time to knit. So one of the things that I was doing through the fall and through the winter, there were two things that I wanted to accomplish. One, I wanted to either finish or frog all of my works in progress. At one point, I had 13 different works in progress on the go, which I found very overwhelming, and I found it impossible to focus. So my challenge to myself was to either finish or frog all of those projects. I am working my way through them one at a time. There's one project that I am frogging just because it is a sock. It is a sock that was half done, and my gauge has changed since I started it, so there was literally no point in continuing to knit a sock that will be too small, especially when the second half of it and also the second sock will not match it. So I frogged that one, but I'm slowly finishing the rest of my projects and getting them off the needles, and it feels really good to just finish stuff and check things off my list. So that kind of self-imposed challenge wasn't always great for my knitting mojo. If I was working on a project that I knew I had to finish and I did want to finish, but I was just bored of, it was kind of a slog at some points in time to force myself to knit and force myself to work on things. In a future episode, I do want to talk about my tendency towards perfectionism and how in a lot of cases that just leads to me procrastinating because it won't be perfect. So I will talk about that later. But the other thing is a lot of stuff sat unfinished because I was scared of kind of finishing it. My work in progress for today has sat for a bit, which I will talk to you about in a little bit. So that was the first thing, is finishing up all of my projects wasn't always great for my knitting mojo. It kind of came and went and came and went and came and went, to the point where I started a challenge to myself in the beginning of 2018 to try and work on making for 15 minutes a day. So whether that's knitting or whether that's sewing or whether that's embroidery or just anything that would be making something, not including cooking because that's to keep us fed. I want to do that for 15 minutes a day because then I figured if I could do that at least a few days a week, then by the end of the week I would be able to see progress. And often you say, oh, I'll just do something for 10 or 15 minutes, and then you kind of get in a groove and you just keep going. I've not been super successful with that just because there are nights where I just haven't wanted to pick anything up. and I'm just not at a point where I want to force myself to try and be creative. This is not a paid job for me. I don't have deadlines that someone else has imposed upon me, so I don't see the point in trying to force myself to do stuff. As an adult, life is already too full of stuff that you're forced to do that you might not actually want to, so who needs more of that, especially with your hobby? So that has been one thing that has kind of led me to be absent from this space. The other thing has been that I wanted to get my stash organized. And I did talk about this a little bit at the end of the summer, and then again, I think in my little episode in October, but my stash was very, very disorganized. I didn't know what I had. I didn't know how much of things I had, which then makes it difficult for me to choose projects that would be appropriate for those yarns. Because my greatest fear is that I would pick a skein of yarn or 2 skeins of yarn and knit something with it and then find another 2 skeins somewhere else and be like, oh, that was a sweater quantity. And now I can't knit that sweater because I knit these other 2 into the shawl or whatever it happens to be. So for me to be able to properly plan out the projects that I want to do, I need to know how much of everything I have. So I did give it a really, really good effort in September and October. I kind of got everything together. I made a big list that I'm slowly putting into a spreadsheet. And we have a little built-in desk in an alcove on the second floor of our house. And I thought that would be perfect because there is a desk and then there is a wall-mounted bookshelf above it. And I thought I could put all of my yarn in the bookshelf and kind of squish it all in, and then I could have my sewing machine on the table and there would be room for a cutting mat, and I could have all of my crafty stuff there. It was out of direct sunlight, so I wouldn't have to worry about fabric or yarn fading in the sun, and I thought it would be great. So I started reorganizing everything and figured out fairly quickly that that space was much too small for the amount of stuff that I currently have. But because my intent is to obviously use my stash and not always have like a giant one, but it will fluctuate over time, I want to use what I have. So I didn't want to go out and buy a whole bunch of bookshelves or anything like that and then empty them out and then have to sell bookshelves. This is also the kind of person I am. I think like 57 steps ahead of where I actually should be instead of just thinking one step ahead and doing that and working on things. So I kind of stalled out on organizing my stash, which meant it was really, really difficult for me to pick yarns for future projects and the next cast on. And if I didn't know what I was going to knit next, then what's the point in finishing anything I'm working on? So I just ended up kind of in this vortex of starting on stuff and finishing a little bit and then starting something different and then finishing something, and there was just not a lot to talk about. And also, the longer I was away from here, the more awkward I felt about being away from this space and what am I going to say, and I was just getting started and I had a little bit of a like subscriber following, and it was one of those things where the longer you went, the more awkward it got. And I finally realized that there's no point where it was going to like loop back around to be not awkward again. So I just need to do it. So I'm addressing it here. I was gone for a very long time. I did not intend to be. It was not great, but here we are. I am back. A benefit of the finish all of your whips thing is I now have quite a stockpile of finished objects that I can talk about. I actually did film a version of this podcast back in, I want to say December, and I talked about, I had like a 3-page finished object list, and I think I talked all told for like 2.5 hours. It was a very, very, very long episode, and then the computer did not upload it. And actually, immediately before this episode, I filmed a 45-minute episode that the computer also did not upload. So if you think I'm awkward and rambly now, that first version was way worse. But I've taken those as signs that the universe does not want me to be super long-winded. So what I'm doing is I'm going to talk about 1 or 2 of my finished objects in every episode, and I'll have like whips and other things that I'm also talking about, but I'm hoping that if I do shorter podcasts, I will be able to do them more often, and I would much rather do something shorter more often than have like once a month marathon podcasts, because who has time for that? Nobody. Nobody has 2.5 hours to sit and watch me talk. Nobody wants that. So, let's move this show. I was going to say move the show on down the tracks, but that makes literally no sense. I'm mixing like 4 different metaphors there. But anyways, let's get going. So the first section is my finished object section, which I call Goat Off My Needles. Because the only thing I love more than a good pun is a bad pun. So my finished objects for this week are not super, super exciting. But I'm going in reverse order from like the oldest finished objects all the way up to my new finished objects. So these have been done for months. They are long gone in terms of time. But anyways, here we are. So this time last year, which is a weird thing to say, but this time last year, like in March of last year, Chantel, who is Knit Pearl Dog on Instagram, hosted a Turkish mosaic knitting knit-along. And the pattern that she chose is this pattern, which is a freebie on Ravelry. And it is the Turkish Tile Slip Stitch Dishcloth by Rebecca Yeager. And it is a great pattern. It took me a couple of days the first time I knit it because I was a brand new knitter at that point in time. I'd only been knitting for a few weeks and kind of didn't know what I was doing. So I knit a slip stitch dishcloth, which I quite like the pattern. It's not really a dishcloth because I knit it out of acrylic yarn, so it's not going to hold any water. It's not going to really be great for cleaning things or anything like that. But I decided I wanted a pair because I thought that they would be good to use as hot mats for like putting hot plates on or for using as pot holders. I don't know that I would use these to pull stuff out of the oven, just because this is like bad scratchy 80s acrylic and I'd be worried that it would melt, to be perfectly honest. So I'm going to use discretion with these, but I thought that it would be good to have a pair. So here's the other one. So now I have a pair. I have a set of them. The first one took me several days. This one took me a night and like a 10th. This one flew, which is hilarious, and I think part of it was I had just finished knitting a lace shawl, which is going to be the next finished object I talk about. So in comparison to that, this was nothing, and I knew how to read my knitting a little bit better because there was about 6 months of time between the first one and the second one, so I'm a little bit of a better knitter, and it went a lot faster. But the pattern is great. It's a great basic. I love the actual design that you end up with. And in organizing my stash, I found a whole bunch of 100% cotton yarn in a bunch of different colors that I can mix and match. So I might actually knit some legit dishcloths out of cotton. And I just think that this pattern is a little more interesting than just your plain garter stitch. So yeah, that's a great pattern. You could also make it smaller and do coasters. You could make it larger and do a tea towel. Do whatever you want. Anyways, so that is the first finished object that I have to talk about. And if you want any information about that, like size of needles that I use or anything like that, it is all on the Ravelry project page on my Ravelry profile. And I think that one even has photos, maybe. Anyways, my second finished object is the Silverwing Shawl by Amy Vandelar, and she's Baroque Pearls on Ravelry. And I actually don't have this object to show you because I knit it as a birthday gift for my mom. She had a big birthday this in 2017, and I wanted to knit her something, knit her a gift for her birthday. So I started it with plenty of time and then procrastinated and ended up finishing it like months after her birthday. And she and my dad came to Calgary just to visit for a weekend, and I went, okay, the shawl is finally done. I need to quickly block it and wrap it up and give it to her. So literally I blocked it overnight, took it off the blocking mat, snapped a couple of pictures, and wrapped it up and gave it to her. So I don't have the actual finished object with me, but I do have subpar photos, which I'm hoping I can figure out how to insert here. those are my photos. I hope to get better ones when I get the shawl back, like to reblock it or after my mom washes it. I'm hoping that I'll be able to snap some better photos of it then. I did really, really like this pattern. It is a paid for pattern, so I'm not going to show you everything inside. But Amy takes a lot of her inspiration from nature. And so the inspiration for this shawl was the feathers on the wing of a bird. So I did make some changes. I added a couple of extra sections, or a couple of extra repeats in some of the sections. And all of that information is also on the Ravelry project page. This is one of the projects that I don't have photos up for yet, but I hope to get that done soon. But in terms of like needle size and all of the different repeats that I added, all of that is on there. I used poppy yarn and fiber, Luxor silk fingering in the silver colorway, and it was perfect. The only thing is that I chose a very yarn intensive bind off, and I ran out of yarn with 10 stitches to go. 10 stitches. So what I ended up doing was going up to my stash and finding like a little piece of merino that was as close a color as I could find and just finishing the 10 stitches with that. What I would do now, just even a couple of months later, is I would pick out that bind off and choose a different bind off so that I could use the same yarn all the way across. It only ended up being like literally an inch at the end of the shawl. But yeah, I would do it 100% properly instead of just like 95% properly. But that is a choice I made, and I have to live with it. The pattern is very, 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 very well written. You have written instructions, and she also gives you charted instructions. I use the written instructions when I knit it. If I was going to do it again, I would probably use the charts this time because I'm just more comfortable with reading. That was just the doorbell. Not going to answer it. Podcasting. So I would probably use the charts next time just because I'm more comfortable with chart reading now, and I wasn't enormously comfortable with it when I started the shawl. But it is a nice option to have both. And especially if you're new to chart reading, it can be nice to see the same thing charted and written if you need help translating effectively from one version to the other. So this is a great pattern. I ended up with a beautiful finished object. My mom really likes it. She's worn it a couple of times and gotten some compliments on it, so I'm very glad that I knit it for her. I do have another skein of the same yarn in a different colorway, and that is earmarked to knit one of these for myself. So that will be one of the projects at some point in the future. But anyways, those are my finished objects for this time. So now we're moving along to works in progress, which I call Alpaca my project bags. I only have one work in progress to show you, and this was started in the fall. I started it for class at the Loop, which is my local yarn store in Kensington, and it is the Sprout Double Knit Cowl by Jill Draper Makes Stuff. This is a paid for pattern on Ravelry, and it is obviously double knit. So for anybody who doesn't know, double knitting is a method where you are knitting the inside and the outside of a garment at the same time, but you're knitting them with the wrong sides together. So both sides of your fabric, instead of having a right side and a wrong side, both sides of your fabric that are visible are right sides, and you're knitting the wrong sides together on the inside of this tube. So you end up with a double thickness of yarn, and you also end up with a perfect mirror image of your pattern in opposite colors on the inside and the outside. It makes a very thick and squishy and soft garment. It makes a very heavy garment. If you're knitting something large, like my teacher Myrna knit a double knit sweater, and it is quite heavy because it's a double knit sweater. I have discovered when I was posting pictures of this on Instagram that a lot of people are scared of double knitting, which I don't think you have to be. It is just knitting on the outside and purling on the inside, and if you can knit, you can purl, you can literally do anything. So I don't think it's that scary, but I think that's also because I took this class when I was like still kind of relatively super beginnery. I still feel like I'm super beginnery in a lot of ways, but I'm not really scared of what I don't know. Like I'll learn, so I'll do it. So I kind of feel like this is almost cheating to call it a work in progress because I'm literally almost done. So for double knitting, what you do is you cast on with your two colors and then you knit inside and outside all the way up. This is a very, very simple um, project in the sense that there are no increases or decreases you have to do. You cast on the same number of stitches as you bind off. The pattern is charted. The first round is written out so you understand how to switch your colors, but the pattern is charted. The charts are very, very easy to follow. You're only using two colors of yarn, so it's not super, super complicated. But the only thing I have left to do is I have to split my stitches onto two needles. So the outside stitches, which are my light colored stitches, go on one needle, and the inside stitches, which are the dark colored stitches, go on another needle, and then I have to Kitchener all the way around the top, and I'm done. That is literally all I need to do, and I've been procrastinating on it for, I think, almost 2 weeks at this point. Yep. So, not ashamed to say that this blue yarn is waste yarn. I have put all of my live stitches on waste yarn because I'm not 100% confident in my ability to properly Kitchener stitch the first time. And if I need to unpick it, I want to know that everything will be nice and easy to pick back up because I have it on a lifeline, essentially. So I'm not at all ashamed of having to do that because why not? If I know it will save me aggravation in the future, why would I not do it? I knit this pattern exactly as written. The one exception to that, the one change that I made, is based on feedback from Myrna, and she suggested that after you complete the pattern, knit one round of the inside color all the way around, and then when you Kitchener it, everything will lie flat. You won't have the possibility of your Kitchener folding over. So that is the only change that I've made. My project page for this is not updated yet because it's not finished, but it will be. I had a really, really good time knitting this pattern. I have always said, well, I only made one mistake, and that is, where did I put it? That is right here, where I forgot to switch my yarns to get this nice dark spine all the way up, but then I just noticed as I was sitting here, another one right there. So I have 2 mistakes in this pattern, but I kind of don't care. That's one of the great things. That's another mistake right there. Oh no, now I have 3. Anyways, very clearly not ripping back to fix this. Do not care that much. It is fine. One of the great things about this pattern is that it's not necessarily super easy because of the way everything is charted and the way everything's laid out. It's not always super, super mega obvious that you have made a mistake. And also, when I'm wearing this is the double knit cowl, it's going to be shoved way down in my jacket because I will only be wearing this on the days that it is super cold. This is a very large pattern. Like, I could probably wear this pulled up over my head almost all the way. So people, I know that some of the projects on Ravelry had said that they took out a couple of repeats, depending on how tall you want it. I wanted to use up as much of the yarn as possible. I am knitting this on my Chiugu interchangeables on my 5-inch tips, and I used a US 5 or 3.75 millimeter tips. You do use smaller tips for these than you normally use for a worsted weight yarn, just because you don't, with the 2 sets of stitches on your needles, you don't want your stitches to be pulled apart, because if your stitches pull apart, then you can see the other stitches behind them. So I'm very happy with how this turned out. The one thing that kind of made me laugh is that my gauge changed partway through. I stopped initially, I think somewhere around here, and then I picked it up and kept going, and my gauge has loosened considerably over the last several months just because I tension my yarn slightly differently than I used to. So I used to, let's see if I can show you. So I used to wrap my fingers around my yarn. So I was pinching it under here, and that would make it really, really tight. Now I just leave those fingers loose and my yarn slides a lot more easily, so my stitches are looser. Also, I'm not as new a knitter anymore, so your gauge tends to change when you kind of fall into your rhythm. But anyways, so my gauge did change a little bit. So like when I'm looking at it, I can see that this sprout repeat is narrower than this sprout repeat because my stitches are a little bit bigger on these. So that's what happens. It's fine. Like I'm not super concerned. This doesn't need to be perfect. I'm knitting this, like I said, out of worsted weight yarn. So I used Malabrigo Rios in 2 colors. So I just used a natural color, which is obviously just undyed. And then this color is called Volcan. And I picked it because I was picking these colors in the fall and I thought this was really pretty. So it has like oranges and browns and, whoops, dropped it, and greens, and it's knitting up in such like this beautiful autumnal variegated kind of pattern. Like it's beautiful. So let me see if I can fold this over so you can see it. So that's what it looks like on the inside. So I think it's just lovely. They're beautiful fall colors. So I've really, really enjoyed working on this. The yarn is obviously very soft, very squishy. It's a lovely, lovely project. I would highly recommend this if you are wanting to try double knitting for the first time. I think this is a great first project to try. It's very easy. It's well laid out, but it's still complex enough that you're actually seeing some sort of pattern. It's not just kind of all one color on the outside, all one color on the inside, which, well, it will teach you the technique. I think this is just a little bit more interesting. So, yeah, so that is my one and only work in progress that I will hopefully be able to finish up and add to my finished objects pile very, very soon. So we are moving on to the final section, which I call a wolf is sheep's clothing. So this is like ancient history, but in November, Paula, who is the dyer behind Bayview Fiber Arts, was planning on coming to Calgary, and she got in touch with some of the people that she's yarny friends with out here, and one of them, Chantel, who is Knit Pearl Dog, works at Villacula Handmade, which is a local yarn store here in Calgary, and she suggested that Paula come and hang out for a bit and invited a bunch of other makers and posted on Instagram that this was going on, and I thought I could probably do that on that day. So despite not being a maker and despite feeling super awkward about going, I went and it wasn't awkward at all for me. Anyways, I hope I didn't make anyone else awkward. But I got to meet Paula from Bayview Fiber Arts, and she's just as lovely as you think she would be. And I got to meet a whole bunch of other makers from Calgary and kind of surrounding area. And one of the things that I love so much about being a knitter and part of like the yarny making community is that everybody is welcoming and everybody's very kind. And the fact that I wasn't like a bag maker or I wasn't a yarn dyer or I hadn't been knitting for very long, like that did not matter. So that was what I was most worried about, is that me not being a maker and not having like a business for that type of thing would somehow be weird. I don't know why I was worried about that, but this is the kind of stuff that my brain tells me other people care about, and shockingly, they do not. So that was sarcasm. So I went to Villacula Handmade and hung out for several hours and sewed in 1,000,001 ends on my On the Spice Market shawl, and I got to talk to a bunch of people. So I got to meet Melissa, who is the dyer behind Prairie Dye Studio, and I have some of her yarn and actually a finished object in her yarn that is coming up in a future episode. I also got to meet Marlene, who is Lady Dragonfly Studio, and she makes bags and special like spindle holders for hand spinning, and she would make like buttons, like pin back buttons and stitch markers. I got to meet Karina, who is Knitty Pie. She is a bag maker here in Calgary and also a prolific knitter and very good at it. I got to meet Kim, who is the dyer behind Flock Fiber, and I obviously got to see Chantel again, who is Knit Pearl Dog, and hilariously, I met another Instagram knitter, and we didn't realize that we were the other person. So I met Janice, who is J. Christia on Instagram, and didn't realize it, and then got home and had like an Instagram direct message from her going, I didn't realize that was you. I would have said hello. And so I responded back, I didn't realize that was you. I would have said hello. So that was kind of funny as well. So it was nice to just sit kind of right before Christmas and talk about making stuff and knit and work on sewing in all the ends on my shawl. And it was just fun to hang out with other knitty kind of people. So because I'm lucky enough to have some skeins of Paula's yarn, I'm just going to quickly talk about them as I am rapidly losing my light. But Paula has an excellent eye for color, and her colors are always beautifully, beautifully saturated. And she does things kind of in themes. So she has several colorways that are flowers. So she has like marigolds and pansies and bachelor button and a bunch of those. She has a color that is a wharf color, which is like a weathered gray, which is this one, like the variegated gray. And then she does a whole bunch of colors that are something on the wharf. So this one, for example, is Buttercup on the wharf. So she has the gray wharf colorway, and then the yellow Buttercup is named after, I don't remember if it's a canary or a budgie, but it's like a domesticated bird. And Buttercup has beautiful yellow plumage. So this is Buttercup on the wharf. And it's this beautiful variegated yellow and white and gray skein that reminds me of like sunshine breaking through the clouds. And the yellow is just so beautiful and saturated, and it's just such a lovely bright color. Like, oh, I love that. I love that little peak of yellow. So this is one of her colorways. She also has Cleopatra on the wharf. So Cleopatra is a duck. And ducks on their wings have these beautiful, like, iridescent blue-green feathers. And so in real life, it's showing up blue on my camera, but in real life, it is more teal. So there's a little bit of green under here. But this is her Cleopatra on the wharf colorway. So again, you have the same kind of variegated gray. That is her wharf. And then you have this beautiful variegated blue, green, teal color. That is the Cleopatra color. So another beautiful variegated. And I know that she also does like Bloom on the wharf, which is a nice light pink. So, I mean, she does really, really beautiful work. This is her, I think it's her Treasure Island. Yes, Treasure Island sock base, which is 400 yards per 100 grams, and it's an 80/20 superwash merino nylon sock yarn. So it's really, really nice. It's beautiful and soft. It does have, I don't know if you can see, it does have a little bit of a halo, so it's a little bit fuzzy, but not insane. And it's soft and it's squishy, and it feels really, really nice. So Paula has a beautiful eye for color. She sends, in some of her packages, she will send little packages of chicken bone candy, which is cinnamon candy on the outside and chocolate on the inside, and it's made in New Brunswick, like right around the corner from where she lives. So that's a nice little treat that I've gotten in some of my packages. I know that she's done collaborations with Melissa from Prairie Dye Studio from across the country, but I just wanted to show you a couple of the skeins that I'm lucky enough to have that I want to knit up at some point in the future. So that is my wolf in sheep's clothing. So we are hitting about the half-hour mark, which is kind of where I wanted to be. Like I said, I'm hoping that I will be able to podcast more frequently if I keep my podcast a little bit shorter. So we will see how well that goes. I'm also kind of making some changes in my setup. One of the things I want to see if I can find are lights for podcasting, because as the light is now changing, I know there are shadows falling on my face and stuff like that, and I just don't want to be beholden to the weather. That was one of the things that held me back from podcasting. On days when I would have time, it would be so cloudy and the light was awful and everything was grainy and the colors weren't showing up properly. So if I can find lights, all of that will even out and I will no longer be at the mercy of natural light. The problem is I obviously don't want to spend like $1 million on podcasting lights because that's ridiculous. I'm not CNN. This doesn't need to be professional grade. So that was kind of one thing that I was dealing with. The other thing I'm sure you've noticed, if you've watched this podcast before, is I am not in my dining room. So my dining room faces north, which was great for when I started podcasting in the spring and moving into the summer because I got a lot of indirect light, which gave me the glow that I needed, but it wasn't washing everything out. The problem with that in winter is that because the room faces north and there's a big tree right in front of the window, it's a very, very dark room now. It was hard to get it well lit. So I've moved to kind of what will be my office / craft area, I'm hoping, which is a room on the second floor of our house, and it faces south and it has nice big windows, and so I do get a lot of natural light, which I would like to kind of take advantage of, and that's why I'm podcasting today, because it's supposed to be cloudy for the rest of the week, so we'll see. Hopefully this all turns out. It's kind of going up whether or not it turns out. I'm going to be honest. I hope that this works. But one of my goals for moving through the fall and into the summer is to kind of get all of my yarn organized, get this crafting area set up using what we already have. The problem is that effectively 2 entire rooms need to be emptied and swapped for that to happen. And that is a large project, and it sows a lot of chaos on the second floor of our house. So it's not a project that I want to start and only work on it for a little bit. Like, I want to start it when I know that I have a week or 10 days where I don't have a lot of other demands on my time and I can just work on it and get it done and get out of that really messy stage. And that just is not right now, unfortunately. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to do that kind of moving into March and into April. I don't want to leave it too terribly long, but we will see. So my goal right now is to have all of this figured out and done by the middle of May. And then one of my podcast episodes can be showing you my super awesome craft room. But we will see. So anyways, thank you very much for hanging out with me. I do appreciate everyone taking time out of their day to hang out in my little corner of the internet. You know how to find me on Ravelry and Instagram, so message me there if you're at all interested. And I will see you guys back here in, I'm going to say 2 weeks, and I'm going to hold myself to that. And yeah, have a great day wherever you are. If it is a place that is cold, I hope you're keeping warm. If it's a place that is warm, I hope you're keeping cool, and I will see you back here next time. Have a good day. Bye.